Today's episode is all about what you can do instead of yelling to get your kids' attention and cooperation. If you've ever found yourself frustrated, raising your voice, and feeling regret after the fact, I totally get that. But there's a better way to communicate that's not only going to get you results, it's going to strengthen your relationship with your kids. 3 years ago, I started seriously working on fixing the damage done by 5 years of toxic stress in my home. And I would come home from work irritated, not looking forward to being asked the question, how was your day? Because in the world of education, my day was the same. Every day was the same. I go into my classroom, I'm driven crazy by other people's children, but not that crazy by other people's kids as much as it is my administration and being micromanaged and thinking about all the time I spent in school to be told that I have to do things a very prescribed way. And so I've got all this pent up anger and frustration with not being treated like the professional that I went to school to be. I was stressed about money, I was stressed about my marriage, and I was not feeling like I mattered. And because I was always on edge, that constant tension made my son avoid me. I was overly critical, and part of that being a teacher mom, and that broke his spirit. And by the time he was 15, he was so full of resentment, he really just wanted to be in his room and away from me as much as possible. And I was trying to figure out how to get him through high school when getting schoolwork done was always a struggle, because it wasn't that he couldn't do the work, he just wouldn't do it. And he had his reasons that I didn't agree with. And so that caused even more stress for me, because I had this expectation that I didn't realize at that time, but have since, really been aware of, that he performed at the levels that I performed when I was in school, because I know that, one, he was capable, and because the story I was telling myself in my head is that if he didn't get a certain GPA or certain grades, he was just going to be a failure in life. And I was projecting all this future failure onto where he was right now. And that was not fair to him at all. But I did some work through some four key areas that make up the framework for damage-free discipline that completely changed our relationship, and where our house now feels like a place of peace and refuge at the end of my workday. It's peaceful and chill for him. It's a physically and emotionally safe environment. And just this past week, he told me that he wanted to spend time together. And that felt really good, because I remember very clearly when he didn't want to be bothered with me. And now he's asking for me to carve out time to specifically just be with him over the course of this weekend. Sometimes in the past, if he would ask me to hang out, it was because he was really sad. Like there was something really going on, and that was his cry for help. Or somebody else said, "Oh, you should spend more time with your mom." And so then he felt like because somebody else told him that he should do it, that he would ask me. But that's not the kind of relationship that I ultimately wanted with my son. And that's why I took making changes within me seriously. So in this episode, I'm going to share some of that internal work that helped me to get to the place that I'm at now, and specifically helped me to get rid of my habit of yelling when I was frustrated. So I'm going to talk about why we yell, the effect of yelling, and what you can do to break that habit. Hey, I'm Tanisha, the VBS Life Coach, and I teach moms simple, God-centered ways to relax, manage their emotions, and reconnect with their kids on a deeper level. My mission is to help you raise kids without those kinds of harsh punishments that we grew up with, that we've spent all this time in therapy trying to get over. And we're going to break these cycles so that we can create a better mental health legacy for the next generation. So let's get into it. Yelling is a reaction. It is not a solution. Anytime that I've ever yelled at my son, I got temporary compliance, but never have I gotten long-term change from that? And when you think about it, it makes so much sense. I knew that yelling doesn't fix anything long-term because nobody wants to be yelled at. Even as an adult, I remember two specific incidents in my career where I was yelled at by people. And it doesn't matter what happens after that, how they treated me after that. The thing that I always remember about them is the fact that they yelled at me. And that took me back to memories of being a kid. And it made me feel small and like I was shrinking and I was angry and I was shocked. And so, why then was it something that I did so much of with my son? Why couldn't I connect what happened to me to what I was doing to him? And, you can't be in a place and ready for something that you're just not in a place and ready for. But when it was time for me to see it, I praise God that he showed me. First, I'm gonna share that one of the reasons I yelled was out of frustration. And I would feel my heart start to beat faster. And for me, that was always a signal that like, okay, I'm getting ready to strike. And by strike, I mean physically reach out and touch somebody. And I grew up as the scrappy daughter, right? I was the scrappy kid. And so in my mind, yelling was how I was going to keep myself from hitting. That didn't work because I ended up just doing both. But in my mind, yelling was the precursor, the thing that was going to keep him safer than me putting my hands on him. The second reason that I would yell is because I didn't know what else to do. And it was like I was just talking, and not getting through to him. And I'm sure that you can relate to that. I know I wasn't getting through because he'd make that tuned out in one ear, out the other kind of face, the one that's like that face. And it would just make me even more aggravated, even more pissed. And then I would just go off because his actions were not changing for the long haul. Even when he said to me, "Oh, can you just talk to me? Because I'll get it if you just talk instead of yell." When I didn't see his behavior changing, it's like, well, just talking to you ain't working either. So I might as well go back to yelling. And it just sounds so silly to me now as I reflect and say it back. But that's what my thought process was. And I was tired of saying the same things over and over again. We yell because we feel powerless. And yelling is the tool that feels like it's gonna work. It's gonna do something when everything else feels like it's failing. It feels good in the body to release all of that frustration and all of that hormonal uptick. And when we do it, we feel good in the moment and terrible afterwards. And I had to start thinking about how truly unnecessary it was because it wasn't teaching the lessons that I needed my son to learn. It was just teaching him fear and resentment and how to tune me out even better. What I came to realize is that no amount of talking was going to make a difference, the same way yelling wasn't going to make a difference if I was talking about the wrong things. Instead of chastising my son for all the things he didn't do and expecting answers to rhetorical questions like, why didn't you do your work? Why are you doing this? Why isn't your room clean? I started asking better questions and not assuming that I already knew what he was going to say and that whatever he was going to say was going to aggravate me. And that nagging and saying things like, you're too smart to be bringing home grades like this, just made him feel small, the same as if I had yelled at him. And it communicated the message that you are a disappointment to me. And since I didn't talk to him very much to just get to know him as a person and just spend time and enjoy the gift that I've been given in him, I was focusing my attention on what he was or wasn't doing. And to him, it felt like all I cared about was how he performed. And that's something I can very much so connect with my own upbringing and feeling like I wasn't seen outside of how I performed and how I looked. And not too long ago, my son told me that it had gotten to the point where, because my focus was all what he was or wasn't doing, never anything about his interest in what's just going on in his head and in his life, he wondered if I even liked him. And that was so eye-opening. Like, dang, what have I done to my child? And so instead of asking things like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing your work? I started asking him questions like, he's the one that's in control of his life, because he is, and I'm here for support. That's my job. I started asking things like, hey, what's on your plate today? And how's that class going? And what's your plan of attack for getting everything done? And asking those types of questions showed him that I'm still super interested and invested in how he's doing in school, but I'm not holding his performance against him or treating him like I'm annoyed with him if the grades that I see in the portal don't match my expectations. And the reality is, I can't follow him around school all day or through his life and micromanage his completion of things. He has a choice. He always has a choice in doing what is expected of him and deciding how he uses his time and his mental effort, his physical effort. And so I had to accept that and let him see what's on the other side of the choices that he makes. And he learned that summer school is on the other side of goofing off, and mom ain't saving you. Mom's not emailing teachers. Mom's going to let you fail. Because I think we get so worked up about the possibility that our kids aren't ultimately successful in life that we try to save them from every little thing. And it was as hard a lesson for me as it was for him to let him learn that some consequences are delayed, and sometimes your chickens are going to come home to roost, and there's nothing anybody else did to put you there. You did that to yourself, despite all warnings, despite all offers of help and support. You chose what you wanted to do, and this is where it got you. And I will say, the year that he did summer school was the last time he failed a class. So once you know how to make adjustments in the way you communicate, yelling just becomes unnecessary. And when you know what's going on in the body, it's something that you think about doing even less, because you know it's not going to help you get your point across anyway. And it's just going to keep you in this elevated state of stress. And at this point in my life, that's just not a place where I want to be. People don't listen to people they don't like. And nobody likes being yelled at. So if somebody spent their day yelling at you, or the alternative, being passive aggressive, you stop wanting to hear what they have to say real quick. When you're being yelled at, your brain goes into survival mode, and there's like this alarm going off in your head telling you, hey, yo, it's time to man the torpedoes or shut all the systems down. And you start second guessing yourself and doubting your decisions and feeling like you can't do anything right. Which, when we have the self-talk that we tend to have that focuses on deficits and lack and what we're not doing, that can create this loop of overthinking and reliving the yelling over and over again, and trying to figure out what you did wrong, or just even simply how to avoid that person or avoid the situation in the future. And being yelled at is going to affect your body, because you're going to feel that racing in your heart, and your muscles are going to tense up, and your body's going to flood with stress hormones. And that's how you know your fight or flight reflex is kicking in. And after a while, being yelled at can keep your body stuck in that stressed out state. So think about the kids who are being yelled at home, or just being criticized and nitpicked and never talked to about anything outside of their behavior and what they are and aren't doing in school, what they are and aren't doing with their chores around the house. They go to school, and I pray that they have a teacher that isn't a yeller, but there are lots of teachers who raise their voice because they don't know how else to get control of their classes, because classroom management is something that is barely taught when you're in school and barely something that is truly developed once you get into the building, unless you seek out that type of support. You're winging it and trying to figure it out on your own. And so you have this teacher who's going off all day, and even if not at you, yelling at the whole entire class, making everybody pay for one or two people's misbehavior. And so they're in that stressed out environment, and then they come home to hear more of it. That's a miserable day, don't you think? And so when you have this stress in the body all the time, you're going to get more headaches. You're going to feel more exhausted. You're going to start seeing other health issues like high blood pressure. And that's not just on the receiving end of yelling. If you are the yeller, those same things are happening in your body. And so then after the fact, you can feel shaky or be on edge for a long time after that because your body's trying to process the shock. And then on an emotional level, yelling makes you feel small. It makes you feel unworthy. Sometimes it'll make you even feel ashamed of yourself. And you really start to question, what's wrong with me? Am I really that much of a problem? So now you think about your kids and ask yourself, what kind of environment do you want them to be in? Do you want them to spend their entire day in an environment that creates resentment and distrust in people? Do you want them to feel like they have to pull back from you emotionally just so they can protect themselves from you? The fear and anger from being yelled at does not just disappear. And the more that it happens, the harder it is to shake off those feelings of anger and resentment about it. And it's just one of the ways that we unintentionally expose our kids to toxic stress and trauma. So, in the moment that you feel like the yelling is about to start, chances are there are sensations in your body that you can start tuning into. Really intentionally start paying attention to what's happening in your body when you know you're about to go off. And I'm going to give you a strategy that, yeah, it has deep breathing as a part of it, but everybody gives you these generic, like, breathe deeply and count to 10 and then you'll feel better. And I'm going to say, no, that's not the part that makes you feel better. The part that's going to make you feel better and calmer is taking in that breath and being aware of that breath. Listen to it. Pay attention to how it feels in your body. As somebody who had my first asthma attack at 2 months old and has had this battle my entire life, I am going to encourage you to even express gratitude for your ability to take a full breath at any point in your day without ever feeling the discomfort of constricted airways. That's something that people take for granted when they are a normal breather. And really focus on the breath, because when you do that, you can't focus on the anger. You can't. And so in that brief moment, you've given yourself enough time to calm down long enough for you to choose how you're going to respond instead of automatically reacting. Ask God to help you respond with love and kind correction. It's not that I'm not going to correct the child or correct an adult for that matter if it's necessary, but I want it to come from a place of love and always with the fact that I still want to be connected to this person on the other side of this conversation. So I'm more intentional and mindful about what I say and how I say it. You can say all the same words that you were going to yell. Calm yourself and say all those words instead of yelling them. It really helps with anyone, but especially kids, if you're not long-winded and you focus on telling them exactly what you want them to do instead of giving these long monologues about all the things that didn't get done and how many times I had to tell you to do and tell you to not do, and I don't understand why you don't listen. That's where that in one ear, out the other starts happening. So focus on telling them exactly what you want them to do. It's not something where it's going to be vague and fuzzy. I'm not going to tell my son, oh, I need you to do better in school. I'm going to say, because I can't control whether he does better, but I can control the environment in which he's expected to do homework. I want you to sit down at the counter to do your homework where I can see that you are getting things done. Do not go up to your room to do homework. You sit right here. And then as the parent, it falls on me to establish the routine and follow through with it consistently. And so once I've delivered that message and I'm being intentionally consistent about enforcing what it is I expect, that's where I see real change happen. So once you've delivered your message, you can start thinking, what about the situation got you so riled up? Because when you know your buttons, you can keep them protected from people pushing them. Here's an example. So I know that people talking over me, especially during a contentious conversation, is going to start bothering me. I'm going to start feeling those little, listen, I wasn't done speaking and this is not okay. And I know that people being downright nasty towards me is going to just completely piss me off. And I can't control whether or not people are going to do those things. And I know I can expect and count on those things to happen. But because I know that those are triggers that are going to make me want to yell or worse, I get to decide what my boundaries are that I need to activate when necessary so that I stay in alignment with type of communicator and person I say I want to be. And people don't seem to realize that boundaries are not for the other person, which is shocking to me. But my boundaries are for me. They are my electrified fence. I can warn you that if you come closer, you are going to get shocked. But once you actually touch the fence, what happens next is no longer up to you. I'm going to call them out and tell them how I will allow myself to be treated. Notice I didn't say how they need to treat me, how they need to act, but how I will allow myself to be treated. And I'm leaving the conversation because I get to decide on the other side of that boundary being touched what I do. I can't control what they do. And that applies to our kids. We have to, one, teach them about boundaries and boundary activation and help them to learn to be brave enough to enforce those boundaries, because that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. They'll set a boundary, but then they don't follow through with the enforcement of the boundary and find themselves upset with other people when really it came down to the fact that they couldn't just activate the boundary they say they have. And our kids are going to learn that from us. I tell kids at work and I tell my son, listen, you can do whatever you want to do, but I get to decide what happens because of the choices that you made. Now, I can't control you or make you do a single thing, but I can control the consequences. You would be amazed at how effective that is. But then I follow through on consistently enforcing the consequences. I back up whatever it is I say. It's your consistent follow through that's going to create behavioral shifts, not screaming your head off. So instead of yelling, think about what your parenting triggers are, whether you need boundaries around those triggers, and then come up with the consequences that you think are appropriate when that boundary gets breached. That way you're going to be acting from a place of having a plan versus automatically reacting based on how you feel. Responding and reacting are two different things. So that pretty much wraps up today's episode. But I do want to say these closing things. So yelling might feel like it's the only way to get through in the moment, but it's not getting through at all if that fight or flight has kicked in and the person is shut down. Because the way the brain works, once you go into that space of feeling attacked, you cannot reason and think logically and listen to the message that somebody else is trying to communicate. You just remember the feeling and the being yelled at. And all that does is just damage the connection that you're trying to build in the name of temporary obedience. Know your triggers. Use your breath as a pause button. And by use your breath, I mean really tune into the sensation of breathing that we take for granted and just assume that the next one's going to automatically come all the time. And really focus on concise, results-oriented instructions that you can communicate to tell your kids what it is you need from them without yelling to do it. If this episode was helpful for you, please share it with a friend, and please subscribe to help my channel reach more moms who are looking for tools for their emotional toolbox. Because being a mom is hard and nobody prepared us for this. Kids don't come with a manual. The last time we read anything even close to a manual was What to Expect When You're Expecting, and we've been out here winging it all this time. And I have learned a lot of lessons the hard way so that you don't have to. And if you want more help with breaking that habit of yelling, because it's a habit, I have a free resource that will coach you through to your no more yelling transition. So you can get it at damagefreediscipline.com, and I'll link it in the show notes. See you next week.